Hello, welcome to the GXM podcast, where we explore news and topics around video game music and the intersection of the games and music industries. We do publish fortnightly, so if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, please make sure you do. My name is Mat Ombler, I am Head of Gaming Partnerships at Laced, and also, since the last episode, I now have a music and gaming newsletter. So, if you aren't subscribed already, please also go to Substack and check out /musicexp. Joining me is my co-host Tom Quillfeldt, who works for the video game soundtrack label Laced Records as well, and he also podcasts with the Kane and Rinse crew. Tom, it's been a long time. What have you been up to?
It has been a long time because there's been some illnesses, there's been some delays, we've had episodes still to edit and all of that kind of stuff, so it has been absolutely ages. In that time, I've mostly, I would say, been enjoying Talos Principle 2 in terms of like soundtrack listening and playing the game. It is stunningly gorgeous. It has the most amazing kind of philosophical story and writing to make you think deeply. And I can play it in front of my kids, which is great. They're confused by it, obviously, but that's fine. And it's just gorgeous. It's just such a gorgeous game. And the music, the score by Damian Maranovic is just, so absorbing. Now, I'm a bit biased because the Talos Principle was one of the very early Laced Records vinyl releases I worked on. So I guess we've sort of known Damian over the years, and we work with Devolver, who are merged with Crow Team, who make the Talos Principle. So, yeah, definitely a bit biased. However, I do think it's one of the best games I've played possibly ever. Like, it's just so in my wheelhouse. And I worry that last year it got a little bit buried because of just, the Baldur's Gate 3 and Resident Evil 4 and Zelda and all the other huge, massive, award-winning, crazy games that came out. So I could definitely recommend it to everybody. What have you been up to, Matt? What have you been playing?
Well, I'm glad Talos Principle 2 got buried because you were really selling that, and I don't want another game to play on top of everything that I've already got to play. I am nearing the end of my time with Alan Wake 2, which has been a lot better than I thought. I don't know what I was expecting, to be honest. Got off to a little bit of a slow start with it, I think, just because I was juggling that. I was juggling the new Prince of Persia game and also Super Mario Bros. Wonder. But now that I've been putting most of my time into that, I've really been getting into it. The controls are a little bit clunky at times, but the story is absolutely mind-blowing. That massive music moment, the musical theatre moment, which was, of course, at the Game Awards. That was just as impressive as I thought it would be. Something that I'm surprised more people aren't talking about, and I'm not sure how much time you've spent with it yet. Super Mario Bros. Wonder, there is a massive focus on music in that, in terms of, like, I know Mario games have always had that cool thing, especially with the later 2D games, right, where you've got characters in the background and they'll jump up and do something cool, like on every fourth beat or something. But there's a really cool Easter egg in this, and I don't want to give it away, but it's one of the coolest, like, end-game musical Easter eggs that I've ever seen. And if you're curious and don't mind spoiling it for yourself, head to Google and just check out what happens when you get all the coins and stars in the game. But yeah, that constantly just delights with just new musical things coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Rayman Legends. I know that people kicked up a bit of positive fuss over that one when it came out, sort of musical levels. So I think, anything in 2023 trying to stand out, even a Mario game, even things like that from a Mario game, it was just such a crazy year. And then, of course, with endless layoff stories, there was sort of this weird bittersweet thing of it being the banner year for quality of games, sheer quantity, and then all these layoffs. So yeah, I think it's just an easy year for things to get lost and are not quite brought up to the light as much as they maybe deserve on an individual basis. And probably we'll be hearing, journalists, writers, people pick out favourite things from games from that year and to do with the score and the music for a very long time. I've got something from 2023 for my recommendation, my 60 Seconds Later, that was another sad story of the game. Didn't do that well. The studio got laid off, but the score is unbelievable. So we'll get to that later. And because we haven't spoken for a very long time, we have a fairly big pile of news to get through. So let's get on to that.
Right. I will jump straight in with what is probably one of my favourite gaming and music collaborations to date. Tekken has a very long history with music, but notably with UK grime. Back in the day, there was a jungle remix album called the Windermere Mixes for Tekken 1. For Tekken 3, they did something called the 7 Remixes, where they got a load of Japanese techno artists to remix music in the game. And this time, Tekken 8, which is out now, is paying tributes to its kind of roots and the link between not just Tekken and grime and rap, but also, I think, the fighting scene in general. They have collaborated with legendary grime artist DEE and the producer Fumes to write the Tekken 8 anthem. It is, by no short measure, an absolute banger. It's class.
I've got the speed just like Steve Fox. How you gonna come to the fighting crocs? How? Come against this, it's a myth. I'm a real bad man like Leroy Smith. Yeah. Don't know why my mind's acting stiff. Elevate your side just like Liv. Ready for war, where the hell do you think we come down there for? Man, they're ready to fight like, man, they're ready to fight the case just like martial law. When they come to the block, everyone ran when I pulled up with my brethren.
It's also indicative of, I think, game studios using music more in major marketing beats, because I think the whole anthems thing, that was something that was started by Riot for League of Legends, obviously, with their annual anthems for the Worlds tournaments. But I've noticed that Call of Duty are now doing anthems. We're starting to see esports teams collaborating with musicians and putting out their own anthems. So I think this is something we're going to start seeing more games doing in the future, just collaborating with artists. And when a new game comes out, here's a song to supplement that as part of a marking beat, and it's also like the annual anthem for the game. We will leave a link to the music video for this in the description, but it is also worth mentioning, given we're in a nostalgic mood for Tekken. Tekken 8 also includes a jukebox mode which has all of the Tekken soundtracks from the previous games. So if you are getting Tekken 8, that is another thing to be excited about.
Yeah, I think that jukebox mode in Tekken is just one of those fan servicey, sort of generous feeling modes that, okay, on the one hand, probably recognises that people might choose their own music when playing fighting games, if they're drilling or practicing, playing online, that kind of thing. Final Fantasy 15 did it when you're cruising on the open world and you could play different Final Fantasy music. Arguably, you could say, well, maybe that weakens the score that's in the game for, the new score that's in the game, new soundtrack. But I think you have to recognise with fighting games that people are possibly gonna turn the music off or switch to their own thing. So I think it's a nice win, really. Next, we've got a sad story, or sort of what feels like the end of an era, which is that Rock Band 4 support is ending. Now, I know there've just been so many people I've heard who still play Rock Band 4. They've still got a massive library on tap, and I don't think that library is going away in any meaningful way, but they will not release any more new songs into the library of nearly 3,000 Rock Band 4 songs that have come out to date. We know, of course, that Harmonix has been acquired by Epic, which makes Fortnite, and as part of, they've just released Fortnite Festival, which we talked about at length, which is a kind of a rock band rhythm game celebration thing, and there's a jam mode in there too, and they've promised that support for Rock Band 4 instruments is coming soon too. So it feels very much like they're trying to signal, go to Fortnite for the Rock Band experience that's going to be kept up to date. And then sadly, this game that I didn't think that Rock Band 4, it was part of, was it like the 2015 revival alongside Guitar Hero Live? And I think the general consensus is that sales-wise, they didn't quite make it. Neither game sort of blew blew the doors off or caused a revival. But the fact that they were still releasing stuff shows that there's got to be a paying consumer base there.
Yeah, because you wonder what the payoff is. How many daily active users does Rock Band 4 still have, and has it had over the past couple of years? Because there must have been enough users to justify the license fees for the DLC. Do you know what I mean? Because like you were saying, 3,000 songs, that is a lot of music. That is a lot of people getting paid. So the new players must have been coming in. Before we jump into the next news story as well, we touched on the instrument support a while back in terms of I had this really clever idea, or I thought it was a clever idea, of going, I should go out to cash converters and charity shops and stuff and pick up a load of cheap Rock Band guitars. Guess how much they sell for pre-owned?
200?
No, all right.
Not that much. 100.
80 quid, which to me is still like, I thought it'd be worth like 20 or 30 quid.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So there must still be a lot of people playing because the demand's there.
If you find me a PlayStation 3 drum kit and a copy of Rock Band Beatles, I'll love you forever. I just really fancy hitting the drums, because I had one go at Rock Band drums ever in an arcade and I loved it, and I've never been able to sort of have the setup since.
As a drummer, it is actually really, really accurate and really good. There's someone I follow on Twitter who's still like absolutely smashing Rock Band, but he's putting his own, because you know you can put your own songs in the game if you've got it on PC or whatever and create the tabs. He's playing like death metal through it and blast beating and doing like a double bass pedal with a single kick.
Well, we know that Darren Korb of Supergiant, of Hades fame, Hades is full of his Halloween metal riffs. It's sort of, he didn't learn from Rock Band, but he was a huge Rock Band fan and on the drums and played the drums himself on the Hades soundtrack, which absolutely rips.
I thought you were going to say he programmed the drums then on the Rock Band drum kit. Just imagine him tracking the music for Hades on a Rock Band.
Knowing him, he would have probably loved to have the Hades soundtrack in Rock Band 4, but hopefully they can do something in the future. Since we last recorded, we got the 66th Grammy Awards for Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games and Other Interactive Media went to Stephen Barton and Gordy Harb, who wrote the score to Respawn Entertainment's Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Congratulations to Stephen and Gordy, worthy winners. Absolutely fantastic to have them represent the medium.
Speaking of ambitious projects, going back to that collaboration earlier on, there is a very ambitious video game concepts album put out by Tokyo-based record label Brave Wave Productions under the direction of Mohamed Tahir. He has basically got an all-star lineup of retro video game composers. And Tom, I'm going to let you run through the name of these because you know how terrible I am with pronunciations. But we're talking composers from Mega Man, composers from Sonic, even composers involved with Final Fantasy. Do you just want to run through some of the people who are involved with this?
Yeah, so it's worth also mentioning that it's a kind of a co-production with Black Screen Records. It's a crazy lineup. It's absolutely crazy. It's Mega Man 2's Takeshi Tateishi and Mega Man 3's Harumi Fujita. Sonic Mania's T. Lopez. Well, it was a reunion for the Ninja Gaiden composer trio. That's Keiji Yamagishi, Ryuichi Nitta, and Kaori Nakabai. There's Yoshitaka Suzuki from the Final Fantasy series. Bayonetta co-composer Takahiro Izutani. Celeste composer Lena Rain, who is covering a Panzer Dragoon Saga track alongside the original composer Sayori Kobayashi. So it is an embarrassment of riches, really, of people from old classic Japanese games and soundtracks, and then newer composers T. Lopez and Lena Rain, who have built up their own following as retro-inspired composers. They don't make directly chiptune, but they are steeped in the world of chiptune music. And, well, for instance, T. Lopez with Sonic Mania did actually recreate some of the original Sonic the Hedgehog pieces and things like that. So, yeah, it's just a crazy project. I think everyone should at least go and check it out digitally. I'm not quite sure when it's out, if it'll be out by the time of this recording digitally, but there's obviously vinyl as well. And interestingly, Brave Wave have an in-house rock band, Super Strikers, who kind of backstopped the whole production, which is so it's just a giant production, you might say, all round.
And then next up, this is something that we've touched on in the past, because we've kind of heard random bits from various individuals, this particular story was brought to our attention by Pierre of the Now Playing newsletter, which is an essential read if you want to discover new video game soundtracks, because he dives into some really curious stuff. I mean, everything from fart style video game music to just really killer soundtracks in these obscure indie games on Steam. So we'll put a link in the episode description if you want to check that out. But the story in this instance is concerning people impersonating video game composers who have nothing to do with those video game composers. So I was already aware of this happening with the Halo composers, Matty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore, where people were essentially hijacking their name, uploading their own music releases, and then making it look like they'd worked with Matty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore just to basically capitalise on the search volume for their names on Spotify. But in this instance, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, this is someone just uploading music and not even putting a pseudonym to it, just crediting Andrew Praler, who I believe is the composer for...
So Andrew is the composer for Outer Wilds. We've got Ben Prunty, who's did Into the Breach and Subnautica Below Zero. Justin Bell, who worked on the Outer Worlds. A chap called Chris Remo too. So it's very odd. It's a label called Only Star Music, all one word. They've managed to score a couple of thousand plays in sort of a week, 2 weeks' time. The stuff hasn't been taken down yet because, of course, these composers don't necessarily have, a major label infrastructure to suddenly set the dogs on them. It's just a very, fraudulent, cheap way of trying to get a couple of thousand plays out of Spotify. It's clearly not something that's immediately reversible just by clicking your fingers. So presumably there'll be some fiddly steps through the distributors that these composers have worked with for their releases. I don't know exactly how it works. You can't upload to Spotify directly. You have to go through a label or distributor. So whoever this is who is fraudulently uploading these things has at least gone to that trouble and then associated these kind of weird garbage releases with the artist pages of these specific indie composers. I bet it happens with music artists, commercial music artists, every day, all over. I bet it's pretty common. And it probably goes to show that the system that is currently run for streaming services is perhaps a little bit too open to abuse like this, but hopefully it'll get sorted out. This comes a couple of months actually after the Tunic soundtrack, for instance, got fraudulently copyright struck off streaming services, which obviously caused some distress to the composers of the Tunic soundtrack, and a couple of weeks of lost streams and things like that. So it seems like for some reason people are coming after these indie game composers because they think that there's enough streams. Interestingly, the timing, I don't know what the timing is, but presumably those composers would have posted their Spotify Wrapped stream kind of tally for 2023.
Good point.
So it's possible someone kind of just went after a couple of on Twitter, whoever was boasting about having some good streams and thanking their fans and things like that and targeting them. So it's a shame.
They're going to have to be careful as well in terms of just DSPs, because I've looked into this before and couldn't really find any stories about it, yet we've spoken to various people and they've all kind of said, yeah, I'm not surprised, it sucks, but it's quite a common thing. That either means people aren't interested in the stories because they don't see the point in writing them because it's just something, it's the natural, this is what happens now, or somebody's just not decided to write a story about it. And do you know what I mean? Because I'm just kind of thinking from a negative PR perspective, all it takes is one really big composer or one really big artist to kick up a fuss on Twitter or whatever and go, hey, this is unacceptable, Spotify, what are you going to do about it? And then Spotify potentially have a small media storm on their hands. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Strange. But onto an absolutely mammoth lineup of video game concerts that have already taken place, video game concerts that are due to take place, live recordings of video game concerts that have recently taken place and are now available to stream online. There's a lot to get through. Tom, do you want to start with the Civilization 6 concert?
Yeah, I spotted that live from the National Theatre of Korea. There's I just couldn't quite. I mean, it just goes to show how pervasive video game music is now in concerts. I just never would have thought that an orchestra in Korea would want to cover Civilization 6, but of course, why wouldn't they? It's a fantastic score. I love that soundtrack so much. Why wouldn't an orchestra want to cover that music? I think the performance is up now on YouTube and people should check it out. But that is, there's so many more here. Matt, what else have we got?
We've got the Near Concert Tour, and the reason I wanted to pay attention to this wasn't so much because there's a video up or anything, although I think if you go back a couple of years on the Square YouTube channel you can find concert recordings, but there was a Nintendo Life review and it brought up a really special fact about the concert, which is basically it was teased that there would be a special recorded reading that would play in between the songs during the show, featuring the English voice cast of Automator's main characters, 2B and 9S. This actually turned out to be a completely unique and never before released story taking place after the events of Automator. Something that Nintendo Life basically described as an epilogue. These audio diaries were shared in between the songs throughout the night, and apparently when they were being read out, the auditorium just went into complete silence. That, I think, is a really nice way of doing a video game concert and not just kind of going, look at this big screen behind you where it's not just a concert, but bringing in new lore from the game and giving fans something new and really encouraging them to get out. If maybe they're intimidated by the idea of going to a concert or whatever else, I think enticing them even more in by going, there's going to be new content here, like there's going to be a new mini story you can check out. I just thought that was really, really cool, and I love to see that.
To be fair, Yoko Taro and Nier, they're pretty well known for
quirky things,
seeding extra lore into wacky, into plays, into all kinds of like mobile games, that kind of thing. So if anyone was going to do it, if in any franchise, it definitely would have been Nier.
There we go. And then I believe GDC announced something as well, something very special for the main stage of their developer showcase.
Yeah, so Austin Wintory, along with Troy Baker, are going to celebrate iconic game music at GDC. There'll be a live instrumental performance that showcases influential and notable game scores throughout history, with a spotlight on music from the past year, including nominees from the GDC Awards and the Independent Games Festival Awards, and also the Grammys. Also, wonderful news, at GDC 2024, composer Yoko Shimomura will also receive this year's Lifetime Achievement Award. Of course, she is a total legend.
And then there was the weird case of the Nintendo Live 2024 exhibition, which is kind of like a esports thing they do in Tokyo every year. Didn't actually go ahead. It got cancelled because of security threats. I believe staff at Nintendo were getting death threats, which is absolutely horrible. But the concerts that were due to be shown there, a concert for The Legend of Zelda and a Splatoon concert, they were both recorded. They are now available to watch live. I have watched the Legend of Zelda concert. It's got some absolutely amazing arrangements of music from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Sounds fantastic. The Splatoon one I've not got round to watching yet, but they're both available on Nintendo's YouTube channels. Make sure you check them out.
And also, April 18th in the UK, the Royal Concert Hall in London. Beyond the Console is the name of the concert. It's a replay of the same programme from the BBC Proms last year that we were at, Matt, that was from 8-bit to infinity, and that had things like some Jessica Curry, some Final Fantasy VIII, some Kingdom Hearts, and a very, very interesting and experimental Battlefield 2042 kind of suite. So if people missed that last time, definitely check this out.
And then finally, wanted to shout out another music and gaming newsletter, which here is me starting a music and gaming newsletter thinking, oh, nobody else is doing this. I'm really being original, really doing something different. Actually find out there's another guy with a music and gaming newsletter who started it much earlier than me. This guy is Kenny Vaughan. He works in licensing for Sony. He is an absolute fountain of knowledge when it comes to all things video gaming. Like, if there's been a track being licensed into a video game, Kenny knows about it, but not only that, he's probably written a really in-depth article about how and why it worked or didn't work. His latest article covers Beat Galaxy, which is the Roblox game collaboration between Super Social and Universal, and he actually has some really positive things to say about it, which I think is good because it shows that there's actually some really cool, interesting music stuff happening on Roblox in between a lot of the branded experiences that can tend to dominate media headlines and without being a little bit too scrappy, aren't always that good.
Yeah, it was really, really great to read that Beat Galaxy review because, we only have so much time. You have more time than me to like jump into Fortnite, jump into Roblox and actually get first-hand experience of it. So I thought his review was very, very thoughtful from that perspective. His newsletter's called Between Gaming and Music, which is Between Music and Gaming, which I guess is suitably different from GXM Games X Music, so we won't have to sue him out of existence. But yeah, definitely go and check that out. Check out Pierre's newsletter. Check out Matt's newsletter. It is a rich time for Substacks on music and video games. For our topic interview, I spoke to Freddie Lauridsen, who goes by Blip Blop, who is one of the major video game vinyl collectors in the community. He runs the blog, blipblop.net, and he has been cataloguing and collecting almost every video game vinyl basically since 1987 in Japan. He's been trying to track down everything, keep lists of everything. He picks up almost everything. He has about, I believe, 1,500 video game related records. He knows just about everything. He knows everyone there is to know within the video game vinyl community. We chatted because every year he does this poll. He polls members of the collector community to find out what their favourite releases were, what their favourite artwork was, that kind of thing. And sadly, he lost the podcast venue that he used to have to announce those results and to sort of talk through them. So I invited him on this show to go through them, yeah. And we had a lovely chat. Let listeners know a little bit about how you got into both video game music and then how you became, as far as I know, one of the biggest video game vinyl collectors on the planet, probably.
Well, the whole love of video game music started with video games, obviously, but I think I really started to think about it with starting playing Final Fantasy on the PlayStation 1 era. Those kind of games, starting walking around humming the tunes after playing, eventually buying the CDs. And some years after, I started getting into record collection, got my parents' collection because they didn't listen to them anymore. And then I came across the Red Dead Redemption soundtrack being released on vinyl, a game which I just played, and I had a special edition that came with the digital soundtrack, so I'd listened to that a lot already. So I ended up buying that for the wild sum of $15, I think. That was kind of the first release, but the real collecting part started some years later when the first dedicated labels for video game music on vinyl started showing up. Data discs were probably the catalyst in a sense when they launched Streets of Rage and Shenmue in 2015, I think. And then Ship to Shore did the Mother arranged soundtrack later the same year. And then it sort of took off from there. And I was like, video game, that's a fun thing, video games on vinyl. I should look out for what's out there.
When did the bug strike you for really staying on top of every release and buying as spending as much of your hard-earned money on as many of them as you could?
Probably around that time with the data discs, and Mother and Minecraft probably was around then as well. Well, I realized that there were labels interested in putting these things out, so I had to try and think about what did I miss before this. As you also mentioned, there's a few indie games mainly that came out previously. Then I learned that like in the mid-1980s in Japan, there was quite a few releases of video game music that was difficult to track down, but I managed to find not all of it yet, but quite a lot of it anyway.
And that's when vinyl was, uncool on its way out the first time.
Exactly, a terrible timing, because by the late 80s and 90s, labels started not to do vinyl anymore and shifted over to CDs. So a lot of the cool soundtracks coming out at the turn of the century there didn't get released on vinyl until later, when some labels now have picked some of these titles up.
Do we know how big the pressing runs were for things like those Dragon Quest games and things like that?
No, as far as I'm aware, there's no public mention of these pressing runs. Presumably they're quite small, based on just how difficult some of them are to find.
Yeah, I mean, Matt went on a pilgrimage to Japan recently, and he was in Hog's Heaven. He just could basically, his eyes were just popping out of his head. Have you been to Japan? Do you have any plans to sort of go there on a collecting run?
I had a plan to go with my now wife some years back, but then she happened to get pregnant, and we had to reprioritize that. And
how inconvenient!
Yeah, even planned, so I can't really blame anyone but ourselves. But no, unfortunately, I haven't yet. We still want to go someday.
From that time, kind of 2015, 2016, what do you think has changed about the video game vinyl market? The most obvious thing to say, and you can hopefully give me some stats here that you've been on top of for several years now, is the sheer quantity of releases. And then obviously with that, as well, a proliferation of the number of labels and, dare I say, bootleggers as well. But is there anything else that's substantially changed over that time, or changes that come along with just a higher quantity of releases?
It's seen as more of a viable piece of merchandise from the companies that do the games as well, like publishers and developers. You would often see, not that often, but it does happen that you get this game box set that also features a vinyl record now, alongside a physical copy of the game and some other merchandise. Or you have companies like Square Enix in particular doing a lot of vinyl records for their own soundtracks. I think we see more game companies seeing vinyl as a solid piece of merch alongside t-shirts, plushies, whatever, posters.
And Square Enix take music very seriously. Obviously, that's the kind of the legacy of Nobuo Uematsu's success and popularity, and the popularity of his material. It's a side of their business now. They've got their Square Enix music label. They've got their merch store, which sells various vinyl products. The releases they choose to do and the kind of choices they make around presentation, I get the feeling that most of the time it's kind of coming from a merch angle rather than a music release angle, which kind of makes sense, because to put the whole of a single Final Fantasy soundtrack on vinyl would be a giant box set of LPs that is almost impossible to ship anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. I think they mainly see it as a piece of merch, but there are some exceptions. I think the Final Fantasy XIV soundtracks, there are 2 box sets out now, have been done very lovingly with the care for the music also. They had Bernie Grundman, who's a very famous mastering engineer, handled those vinyl releases. They had Soken, the composer himself, do YouTube videos presenting these box sets. I think there was even an interview with Nobuo Uematsu as well, where they talked about it. So I think it depends on who internally gets to sort of handle these releases. Is it the merch department? Then we get the picture discs like we've seen for Final Fantasy 7 through 10. Is it the composers or someone who really feels strongly for the game? Then I think they can easily do a better product as well, like these box sets.
And just on the numbers, I'm looking at this chart. You've marked 1987 as that kind of early point of those Japanese releases, of 37 releases in that year that you've sort of logged. And then jump forward to 2015, you've got 55 releases in the year, video game music vinyl titles. And then last year, or the last 2 years, 2022, we had a peak of 288 releases. Individual releases, and then 250 in 2023. So a slight decline, actually, but still sort of roughly 5 times the number that we had just in 2015. What do you make of that? Obviously, it's a drain on your wallet. The more there are, the more you'll want to buy, and all of that personally. But is it purely just sort of people waking up to the value of music in this format? Is it as simple as that?
Probably a series of reasons, but I think largely it's a byproduct of the vinyl resurgence that started in the 2010s, I'd probably say, maybe even before that, depending on how you count. I don't have the stats on hand, but around that time. And then it slowly started ramping up a little later, because game music is still a niche genre, if you can call it that. A lot of people, especially these days around my age and college age even, have a strong relationship to video games in general, but also the music. There's a lot of nostalgia and emotion involved with what you played growing up and what you play now even. And some of it just really good music that you'd want to listen like any other piece of music.
And also, I mean, this might apply to you slightly less, just because you are an audiophile, you are a big collector. But of course, as we know, we've discussed the merch angle, that vinyl often comes with, really large, nice pieces of art. It could be bespoke artwork that's been created for that release. It could be key artwork. It could be something from the archives. And a lot of sales, I think, might be attributed to people who want to own the physical thing, who want to own the art as much as the music on that format.
Absolutely.
And we always wonder about how much side 5B of like a giant box set actually gets played at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. That's this stat from the BBC, I think, actually, that like half the people who buy vinyl records don't have a record player. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if that number is even higher for people who buy video game music on vinyl, because as we also touched a bit on earlier, it is in a large way a piece of merchandise. So it's also something you can display to show your love of the game. It could be a conversation piece. Some people, they buy them for the artwork and pretty colored vinyl, and then can frame them together and hang them up on their walls if that's what they want. Sure, you can do that with a regular album as well, but with the amount of effort that's often put into artwork on many of these releases, it makes even more sense to treat them as something to show rather than listen, or at least not just for listening.
We've found that with the Resident Evil releases over the years, as we kind of stacked them up. I think we're at, I don't even know where we're at now, 12 releases or something like that. There are mad, in a wonderful way, collectors of Resident Evil merch who have these cabinets, whole rooms full of multiple cabinets with jackets and statuettes and just everything you could possibly think of, like every different version of a Blu-ray of the movies and the animated films, and just crazy amounts of stuff. And now there, amongst all that other merch, is the vinyl records sort of propped up with a statue of Lady D in front of it or something like that. And it's something that from the very beginning, when we started the artwork for that series, and we've tried to stay consistent, is just thinking of the front cover as, a showpiece. We've always tried to put horrible monsters on the front rather than ever go for any of the sort of slightly more generic heroes, because we just always thought it would be more grisly and fun and grotesque.
I really appreciate that, actually. That could be nice promotional artwork or concept artwork for a game, but also some of these new pieces that really emphasize some memorable parts of a game to make them stand out, like you've done with the Resident Evil and other labels have done with some other titles as well, for sure. But it's a good point about the franchise collectors, or what you want to call them. I don't know what you want to call them, but because I see the same with Final Fantasy, because I keep an eye on that part of the game community more. They have these cabinets as well, and the vinyl records go in there, and for Nier or Tekken probably as well. A lot of these bigger franchises, but also smaller franchises that has these like cult-like followings.
Yes.
You see like Valhalla or Undertale, or they treat these records with the same kind of respect that these blockbuster franchises do.
Funny you use the word cult, because that will come up later. One of the breakout indie games from the last few years, definitely culty. Video games has certain series that people just fall so deeply in love with, and they cosplay as, and they go to the concerts of, and they collect all the merch of. And in that way, that kind of fandom, I guess, tallies up with anime and tallies up with movies and film. Where does the name BlipBlop come from?
I don't think it was something I thought a ton about back when I did the blog. So when I started the blog, it was sort of, there were two sides to it. One was that I started buying these video game vinyl soundtracks, and I was curious about what was out there, and I was checking out Discogs, and I was checking out another database called VGMDB that only catalogs video game music and anime music also. And Discogs were pretty up to date with newer stuff, and VGMDB had a pretty good database on those old Japanese things in particular. But I sort of wanted one place where I could keep all this information and also keep track of what was coming out gradually. So I figured it'd be a good project to do myself. I was also working on my master's thesis at the time, and I needed something else to occupy with in order to not go insane. And BlipBlop ended up becoming that project.
I assume you have that kind of mind that wants to kind of catalogue and keep track of absolutely everything, and loves a good spreadsheet and feels some kind of anxiety that if there's something you missed or I get it, like a pleasure of updating, of coming across, spending half an hour, too much time of an evening updating spreadsheets of things you just want to keep on top of.
I feel very called out.
Well, I'm right there with you, don't worry.
Basically, I like my lists and spreadsheets, and this is another list and spreadsheet for me that started ramping up quite explosively in the following years.
Tell me, do you have a listening backlog?
Yes, I have right now, but also I got a lot of records in this week. Otherwise, I had actually beaten my backlog, but now I have quite a few I need to work through. But I always get through the listening backlogs eventually. Just it's a matter of time.
But you'll never get through the gaming backlog because, let's face it, who will?
Oh, no one does that.
In a million years, yeah. There's too many games, too many good games. Are there any records that you, like, firm favourites of your collection that you regularly go back to?
There's a few, and some of it is again fueled by what my kid wants to listen to, because you have to make compromises sometimes. There's this one of the old 80s records. There's a Famicom record, official Nintendo release from 1986, I think, called Famicom Music, which has the Super Mario Brothers music, and he will be happy to listen to that on repeat.
Aww.
It has like this big question mark, like the power-up boxes you jump into as Mario. So he'll always go like, I want to listen to the question mark record.
You have done a poll. You do this annual poll for your BlipBlop blog, and you go out to the community and you get as many responses as you can. When did you start doing this? What inspired you to do it, and what were you trying to find out?
So the first poll was actually, I had to look it up myself because I wasn't sure, but it was in 2017. So I've done this for quite a few years as well. It actually started out with another podcast called Video Game Grooves, I'd sort of do the poll for them, and then we'd present the results and talk about our own favorite releases of the year. That's kind of how it started, and then how it continued for a lot of years. Then for this year, I wasn't actually sure if I was going to do anything, but the video game vinyl community on Discord asked if I was going to do a new poll, and I figured I could do that, and maybe to change things up a bit, add some new categories to get a bit more insight in what people actually appreciate about these releases. Do they have different approaches to different aspects of a release, like artwork and packaging and the music scene outside of the vinyl release itself? While previous polls had just been asking people about their favorite records without any additional context as to why these records may be popular. Usually you can get a feel for why. I've rarely been super surprised about the top picks, because it's usually popular music from popular games. Because
that's likely to have sold more people have got it in their hands.
Exactly, and there's some games with more celebrated soundtracks, and obviously they get popular for vinyl releases as well.
Do you mind sharing how many people responded this year or for 2023? Is it grown? Is it shrank?
For this year, it shrank a little bit. We have just over 200 people who responded. I think I had 300 something last year, and I think I've just not pushed it as hard this year because I've been busy with other stuff, and the idea of actually making it this year was created more on a whim because people were still interested in these polls.
It's not very scientific to say this, but we should probably assume that these are fairly dedicated collectors who are, on the lookout. They're in the groups, they're sharing things, they're desiring after various grails and stuff, rather than they be part of the separate game communities. Like they might be a big Resident Evil fan and they're collecting all the merch, and you're potentially less likely to have gathered those people up in the results, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a good way to reach out to the general gaming sphere of people, or what you want to call them. It's the reach is generally within the game vinyl community.
So, without further ado, shall we hit up the top 10 most voted for undisputed favourite release of 2023?
10 titles in there, but yeah, there are 3 titles on 3rd place and 4 titles on 5th place, so it ended up being sort of a top 5 instead, unintentional top 5. I can start from the bottom up to create all the suspense. On shared 5th place, we have Bayonetta, which was released on vinyl by Wayo Records. We have your release of Call of the Lamp.
Yeah, through the Devolver Digital Store.
We have the Final Fantasy XIV vinyl box set Volume 2 from Square Enix. And we also have the 20th anniversary vinyl release for the Kingdom Hearts series, also from Square Enix. On 4th, we have Frog Fractions, released on vinyl by Turtle Pals Tapes, a very small label. And a game that's a few years old, so it's fun to see that pop up again. But it's, speaking of those like cult-like games we had, it's a good example of those. 3rd place, we have three shared releases. We have Neo Tokyo, released on vinyl by Stumpy Frog Records. Signalis, released on vinyl by Very OK Vinyl. And we have Super Lesbian Animal RPG, beautiful titled game, released also by Turtle Pals Tapes. On 2nd place, we have the Hotline Miami 1 and 2 Complete Collection, released by Laced. And on 1st place, we have the Hi-Fi Rush soundtrack, also released by Laced.
Obviously, we were very, very humbled and happy to see the number 1 and 2. Some of the ones in the other places, like games I've not heard of, Neo Tokyo, Super Lesbian Animal RPG. Where did these releases spring from? Do you think there's something about the vibe of the music or the vibe of the packaging that helped them, get above franchises like Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts?
For like Super Lesbian Animal RPG and Frog Fractions, the label Turtle Pals Tapes were pretty good about pushing the poll. And that in itself can have a good effect on how people vote, obviously. Like, that's fair game too.
Yeah.
Because it's part of the community about the vinyl records. Stumpy Frog is also very involved in the community. And his release for Neo Tokyo has been talked a lot about and appreciated by a lot of people. And it sold out all... the first pressing was 500 copies in 2 different variants, with a very special kind of cover and packaging, which was really cool. So it's a really appreciated release, even though it's for a smaller game. It's a Half-Life mod, of all things. But it was popular enough to get another pressing that's up now, I think, for order. So there's a lot of interest in it still.
And it's something we didn't talk about before, but there's a funny thing with video game music and vinyl releases is that there's kind of like multiple genre preferences happening at the same time, because there's like the genre of the video game, which itself might make a particular release more or less niche, whether it's like an RTS game or it's a hugely mainstream action game or whatever. So there's the genre of the game. There's the genre of the music, of course, which might be neo chiptune. It might be full orchestral, so on and so forth. And then you've got the aesthetic genre on top. So something like cyberpunk as a kind of artistic and musical genre, or fantasy kind of things. And that might be quite different from the music genre, but you'll get pockets of people who in particular collect, for instance, cyberpunk video game vinyl releases, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think I mentioned Valhalla before because it has some sort of cyberpunk vibe, and people who like Valhalla also tend to like Snatcher or Police Nauts. That vibe of cyberpunk games. So you sort of have that pocket that has similar-ish music, but it's still the overall cyberpunky vibe that sort of draws them in because there's a feeling about that too. And JRPGs generally also attract the same crowd of people.
Yeah.
Even if the music might be somewhat different between games.
And we're starting to see, of course, well, there probably have always been RPGs made outside of Japan that still somehow, or they're aiming to fit into that aesthetic genre, things like Sea of Stars or
Chained Echoes.
So in that way, creators can kind of slip into an overall genre. Just on the top two, obviously, very happy to see Hotline Miami. I think Hotline Miami is a bit of a cheat because those games are some of the most influential video game music released in the last 10 years or over the, more than 10 years now, since 2012. Soundtracks that lived beyond the games even, where people buy into the aesthetic of Hotline Miami. It was an easy one to assume that would do well because we went out of our way to make sure we got both games and every track we possibly could and put them in a giant box that could, honestly, you could use to kill people with. It's so solid and heavy. I don't feel like Laced Records can take much credit for Hi-Fi Rush because the game itself is just so full of life and it just came out of nowhere from Tango Gameworks. And it's a music game, so of course people associate it strongly with the soundtrack. And Tango Gameworks did an amazing job of the sleeve design for it. They absolutely have to take the credit artistically. So the next category, we have the top 3 favourite video game music released on vinyl in 2023. So is this where you wanted to focus specifically on the actual music itself?
Yeah, I wanted to keep the focus still on vinyl because that's kind of what I do. But to focus here on just the music, it doesn't matter if it was a plain black record housed in a brown paper bag or whatever. It's just that didn't happen, obviously, but it was just to focus entirely on the music, what people preferred to listen to without having to consider anything else.
And what have you've broken this down? Did you poll these in AAA and indie in sort of separate groupings?
Yeah, they had separate groupings, and I sort of consulted the Game Vinyl Discord a bit about these categories and ended up with these 4 that I think are different enough from each other that they can stand on their own. Again, that's another category on top of things. You have people who also like retro games. You have people who play a lot of modern AAA big blockbuster games. Who prefer those type of things and will buy those things. So they seemed hard to compare just musically. Also to focus on stuff that was released recently, which usually driven by the AAA category because those vinyl releases will often be released around the time of the game coming out, or at least some time after recently-ish.
They can be a part of the marketing for the game, and also the actual vinyl release itself benefits from a lot of marketing activity that happens around a big release.
Exactly, and same with indie games. Essentially, there's a few older indie games that gets brought out every now and then, but the category was also this year dominated by newer titles. While retro games are obviously different because that's like a span of 20 plus years to pick games from. Then I had to look out for what came out last year for that category. And same with arrangements, that can be from any kind of game.
So what have we got for the AAA category?
In third place, we have Sonic Frontiers, where Datadisc released the Starfall Island music in a box set this year. That was a bit fun release because they had a double LP that came out in 2022, December, and then they had the box set that came out in January 2023 last year. And so it snuck in this year as well, because it was a very popular soundtrack that surprised quite a few people.
Yeah, there was actually a stat that co-host Matt published earlier. I think that the Sonic Frontiers album on streaming services has just passed something like 100 million streams.
I'm not surprised, it's really good.
I'm still working through it. I'm very slowly, there's so much of it now because they've got different volumes and stuff.
You should try to just take the Starfall Islands music. You can reference the vinyl track list, and try just to listen to that in a sequence. That's an entirely different experience, I can imagine. And I really like what they did with the soundtrack there.
On GXM 20, we did have a bit of a discussion about the level of curation for vinyl, and that digital soundtracks have got quite long and unwieldy, and the listening experience possibly suffers for just sheer completeness of music, and how, obviously we know curation lives on through vinyl, and it's something I'm trying to bear in mind as we weigh up the chances of doing a big box set versus a slimmed down thing versus a double LP. And I've come to you pleading several times, haven't I? Where it's just like, Freddie, I don't know what to do. Should we go big? Should we go small? Should we cut it all? Should we? It's just a difficult thing to judge sometimes. What's number 2 on the AAA games category?
Number 2 is the soundtrack to Cyberpunk 2077, which was released by CD Projekt Red themselves. After people badgering them for a long time, I imagine. I guess it's no surprise that it hit this list because it was a very requested soundtrack to be released on vinyl in the first place, and it's just a popular soundtrack that has had several releases come out, or at least up for pre-order, since the original base game soundtrack.
And it hits everything, doesn't it? It hits the cyberpunk genre. It's a massive AAA game with a ton of marketing that hasn't really stopped. So it's just been front of people's minds, I think, for a couple of years now.
Yeah, but it missed having a reasonably sized pressing run because it seems to sell out instantly every time they put up more, which is fun for a big AAA game. Usually those are available for a bit longer. And on the first place, we have also, probably not surprisingly, we have God of War Ragnarok, which was released by Sony Classical.
I think that would probably be my favourite as well, because it took me the whole of 2023 to finish that game, because it is a very long game. The actual soundtrack album is very well curated. It's very tight. It's not massively gigantically long. It's very focused, and it develops on the themes from the first soundtrack. So it is nice to actually listen to them as a pair. And he's just obviously, a really fantastic soundtrack composer. And there's a couple of cues on there that they just like lift off. There's this one called The All-Father, which I won't spoil for anyone, but it is the most enormous kind of cue ever. It just goes hugely bombastic and it's wonderful. Have you checked it out much?
I have the vinyl release, and I've listened to it a few times, but I need to play the game. I've played the first reboot God of War 2018, but I haven't gotten around to Ragnarok yet, so I need that sort of context. I always, at least personally, find it a bit harder to appreciate these more orchestral AAA soundtracks without having that connection or context to the game, because they're often so tied, at least on an emotional level, I guess.
So we got the indie games category next.
Yes.
What have we got in third place for that?
On third place, we have the soundtrack to Genesis Noir, which I 8-bit released on vinyl. And that's a really cool jazzy noir-style soundtrack. Very abstract, artsy indie game. I played it last year and I've forgotten so much about it already. But it's a really nice soundtrack, and it's a cool release too on vinyl.
And it's the kind of thing, I mean, I 8-bit do all sorts of sizes of release, but I think it's doing the arty indie game is for me, it's their like specialities, things like Untitled Goose Game and Outer Wilds and stuff like that, Journey, of course. So it makes perfect sense that they would handle and do a great job with Genesis Noir, which I've been meaning to play for ages. I've owned it for ages, but time backlog.
Oh, for sure, I can relate. It's not a very long game. I could definitely recommend it.
Oh, okay.
Now there's a sequel coming out, or a spiritual sequel sorts as well.
And what was number 2? This has been quite a sort of quiet cult, celebrated cult game, hasn't it?
It has, and I wasn't really aware of this before the vinyl release. It's Signalis, which is very okay vinyl, put out on vinyl just late last year. I wasn't really aware of how popular the game was until people started to talk about the vinyl release, and I started seeing people post memes from this game, and I hadn't really realized how big an impact it had.
It's the vibe thing, right? It's both a very well-made game by all accounts, and that sort of slightly sci-fi horror field that's a bit Resident Evil, it's a bit Silent Hill, so it ticks all of those boxes for people, because that type of horror, that kind of, I don't want to call it J-horror because that means something different in films and manga and stuff, but horror games that came out of Japan at a certain era, it's one of those that hints back to those but is a solid, modern game in and of itself. and just huge vibes of that kind of thing. I think people really like. I would imagine everyone who bought this record has probably got or trying to acquire the whole Silent Hill catalogue as well on vinyl.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's an overlap there. First place is Cult of the Lamp, released by you guys, at least.
Yeah, this was a Devolver title.
Devolver title, yeah, on their storefront.
So the Cult of the Lamb soundtrack is by a kind of electronica artist called Riverboy, who made a very cool soundtrack for the game. The game has blown up, in part thanks to its incredibly canny social media presence and memeability, and being an excellent game, of course. But just the central character design by Carlos Dalmau, I think that's how you pronounce it, the artist, the illustrator who worked on the game and did all these extra pieces of art as well. And just a great soundtrack. So yeah, really, really pleased to see people enjoy it. Have you picked this one up?
I have the soundtrack, yeah. I have yet to play the game itself, though. But I really enjoyed it. That was my pick, personal pick for indie game as well. I wasn't really sure what to expect given the theme, the cute cult horror theme of the game. But these kind of not entirely lo-fi, but sort of chill electronica vibes. I wasn't really prepared for that, but it really works for me. That's actually one I've put on a lot this since it released, because it's a really nice listen that works in many settings.
So what have we got in the retro games category? I mean, retro games vinyl is something that is super interesting to me every year, because when we talk about, at the label, we talk about, games we'd love to do, games that we're going to research and pitch to do older games. It feels like so many of the greats have already been done, your Streets of Rage 2, that kind of thing. But actually, I find that every year people keep on coming up with surprising titles that I didn't know hadn't been pressed yet, and this year was pretty strong for that. Some really big retro titles. So what have we got here?
We've got on third place we have the Virtua Fighter soundtrack, which was released by Cartridge Thunder, which was a really cool release because it included both the arcade soundtrack and the Sega Saturn soundtrack on 2 discs.
Have you managed to listen? Is there much difference between them? Is it noticeable?
I've only listened to the vinyl soundtrack a couple times, and I'm not super familiar with the game itself, so I haven't really had time to sit down and compare. Although I do really appreciate when labels have the option to include multiple versions of soundtracks for different platforms, because usually there can be a really interesting difference in some of these.
Yeah, and it gives it an archival quality, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What's number 2?
Number 2 is the Suikoden 2. Which was released by Ship to Shore, who's had a strong relationship with Konami for a number of years, and this game has always been a popular JRPG, probably the strongest or at least the highest regarded in the Suikoden series. So I'm not very surprised to see that make the top list in this retro category.
And it's interesting because when we put together our hit lists and things, sometimes of big long-running series with lots of titles in it, you can't fail to notice when there's like a standout one that that people can't wait for you to get to, and that's going to sell better and potentially get repressed more than others in a series. It's kind of inevitable, really, because that's just where people's nostalgia is, I think.
I was actually surprised that it took this long to get this soundtrack out, because Konami's been releasing records for quite a few years. They were some of the first one of the first Japanese publishers to seem to really jump onto the vinyl train and be okay with licensing out their soundtracks. And given how popular this game was, and still is, seeing as it's getting a remaster this year, hopefully. But I'm happy to have it.
And then number 1 is, I think if I owned it, it would have been my favourite. I think it's a gorgeous presentation and a brilliant idea for a release. What have we got?
We have the Wipeout Zero Gravity soundtrack, which is the score, not the licensed tracks from the original Wipeout game for the PlayStation. Actually, it's the first 2 Wipeout games, what was called 2097, the sequel. So it has the score for those 2 games made by Tim Wright, also known as Cold Storage, who is the in-house composer.
And I interviewed Tim recently for the Laced blog, and he's done a ton of interviews recently as well. So people should definitely check around if they're interested in those Wipeout soundtracks, because he's been on the rounds to kind of reminisce and tell people about the time. But I mean, he's one of those fascinating creators that's just made such a mark on the industry, but quite quietly, relatively. So he went on to do the music generator games, or there was music for the PlayStation, Music 2000, which I really loved. Music 2000. It was like my first digital audio workstation, really, my first experience of that. And then he went on to do the sort of help design and put together the MTV generator games for PS2 and onwards after that. And, some very famous electronica producers cite both those games and the Wipeout soundtracks for influencing them. So these are hugely influential soundtracks and hugely influential games when it comes to club culture and dance music in games, and also games' influence on dance music. And the ironic thing is, he wasn't a dance music producer, and he'd never been to a club when he started working on Wipeout.
No, I read your interview as well, and there's some cool liner notes that also touch on this on the release itself. It's just a perfect sort of time pocket to that mid-90s Warp Records-ish scene of dance music that still holds up extremely well today.
Absolutely. I mean, it could be fresh today. It sounds so great.
Yeah, and they got for, I guess it's a bit cheating, since the category in the poll is for taking the music outside of the vinyl release. But for the vinyl release, they had some pretty cool electronic music producers doing brand new remixes of some of the tracks as well, which was a really nice addition. And this release was actually my number one pick overall for favorite releases of this year, or last year.
It's a lovely, it looks so good. Next category, we have the arrangements category. So I assume that it's covers and arrangements.
Yes.
This area is fascinating to me. I'm so surprised and delighted to see vinyl releases for these arrangement and covers albums. It seems baffling to me on the one hand how something that's not even an official game soundtrack could have enough support to support vinyl releases. But not only that, they get repressed. They're hugely popular. These are wonderful musicians working on them. How do you feel about the arrangement scene and the vinyl there?
Oh, well, I like it. It's very thriving, and it's a cool way to listen to some of your favorite game music, but in a new way, to see and hear different interpretations of what it could be in different genres. I mean, I think part of the reason why it thrives as well on vinyl is because often the arrangements that are very popular are for games that haven't had and probably won't have an official soundtrack release. So you can sort of experience your favorite games in this way instead. I have to be very careful to make it sound like it's just a poor man's replacement for the original soundtrack, because it's definitely not. There are some really, really cool takes and interpretations that stand very strongly on their own.
Yeah, and the talent at work,
sure.
Both the performers and the actual arrangers themselves in creating these. And they are really well recorded as well. So in terms of actual sound quality, it makes in some ways more sense bringing the music of some of these games to vinyl than the older 8-bit or 16-bit music. Of course you can bring that stuff to vinyl, and we love it, and that's great. But in terms of the audio file format, it makes sense to have a live piano recording or a full orchestral recording in some ways represented in vinyl.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I love many of these releases, and also have bought way too many of them over the years.
And on your shelf, do you keep them in an arrangements category, or do you put them next to the games that they come from?
They're put next to the games that they're from. I have been considering if I should rearrange, rethink how I sort, but for now it's just alphabetical based on the game title, both for soundtracks and arrangements.
Awesome. So what have we got in the top 3?
On second place, we skipped straight to second place because it's a tied first place. In second place, we have the Distant Worlds 6, more music from Final Fantasy, which was released by AWR Records, who handle all the Distant Worlds releases. And I guess this isn't a big surprise, because these are always hugely popular and great arrangements albums. For shared first place, we have Piano Collection's Chrono Trigger, which was released by Materia Collective, who specialize in video game music arrangements. And alongside that, we have Trio of the Goddesses, which was released on vinyl by Manawave Media, which is the Legend of Zelda series arrangement album.
I'm stunned Freddie, I'm absolutely stunned that Chrono Trigger, Zelda, and Final Fantasy would be in the top 3.
It's a big shock, right? No, these are always hugely popular when doing arranged releases. It's the majority of arrangement albums that come out each year will usually feature some of these games in some capacity because they're just that popular and with memorable soundtracks.
These are the series that they just keep giving, don't they? These Nintendo and Squaresoft games from the 90s, 80s and 90s.
Yeah, there's not going to be any shortage of new arrangements for those games anytime soon, and people just can't get enough of them. And I'm partially in that category as well. I may moan about the amount of Zelda arrangements we get sometimes, but I still end up being surprised at the quality of many of them.
How many Zelda arrangement albums have you got?
Oh, I don't have the number in hand. More than I care to admit. Let's put it like that.
More than 10?
Yeah, definitely.
That is incredible. You don't have the official Zelda vinyl on your shelf.
No, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, indeed. That piano collections, that Chrono Trigger piano collections, that's a David Peacock joint. And is it Trevor Alan Gomez, I think, is the pianist?
It is, yeah, it is.
I mean, they are a fantastic pair. David's arrangements are absolutely top, yeah.
Yeah, they're incredible.
He really takes you on a journey. I mean, he does the perfect job, doesn't he? Of like, you still recognise the tune in there, you're still enjoying the music of the game, but an artist is taking you on a new journey, a new short musical journey of your own. So, yeah, I really, really love that one. Let's move on to the top 3 favourite original artwork and illustration category. What have we got?
We have on third place, we have the vinyl release for Boxnax, which had artwork done by Nicole Gustafsson, which was released on vinyl by I-Made-Bit. And I-Made-Bit is consistently... They focus a lot on the artwork, so I'm not surprised to have one of their releases in this top 3 here. And it's a really cool gatefold release with beautiful illustrated artwork. Super charming. For second place, we have Super Metroid Recreated, which has artwork by, I'm gonna butcher his name, I'm sorry in advance, by Pierre Thiss, which was released by the beautifully named We Release Whatever the Fuck We Want Records.
WRWTFWW Records.
Yep. Which is a recreation, just like the soundtrack is this. It was recreated by a guy calling himself Jamin Sam Miller, and I'm not gonna do justice to the process of him recreating it, but he takes the MIDI samples used for the soundtrack, since it's made for the SNES, and then finds the original uncompressed samples to give it this more modern feel, which is sort of uncanny valley at the same time, but also an interesting approach to arrangement albums. And much like that, the artwork is also themed around the Samus, of course, and the enemies from the game. And once again, for the first place, we're gonna visit a lace joint with the Hotline Miami complete collection, with the artwork by Isma and El Huevo.
It's a little bit unfair, this one, because El Huevo just built such a following, hasn't he, with his iconic art?
He really has, and I guess he can attribute a lot of that to Hotline Miami, at least getting his name out there, right?
It's symbiotic, isn't it? You know, because he did the covers for those games. Those are iconic. He was friends with the developers and helped inspire one of the characters in the game, and did several tracks for them, which helped set the mood. And he did both the Hotline Miami 1 vinyl release for Laced all those years ago. He did the jacket for that, which I love. And he also did the I-Am-8-Bit Hotline Miami 2 jacket. So it was inevitable that when we were going to come back to this and you know, do one last hurrah and get every single possible piece of music together, that he would be leading the charge on the artwork. As I recall, it was him who brought Isma in to help with the sleeve artwork, because of course it's an 8-disc release, so there's a lot of artwork to produce. And El Huevo's Nicolas Orkeblad, his own pieces for the front and back cover, are very evocative, dare I even say divisive. I'm really glad to see it at the top of this poll, but I was also glad to see him shaking it up with the artwork for this. I wasn't expecting to see these pieces, and they're so kind of direct and in your face and violent, that totally matches the game, but is also in some ways totally unexpected.
Yeah, it's a tough display piece for those people who want to put it on the shelf and show the world, right?
Yeah. And then Isma's artwork for the sleeves are quite different. They kind of depict different scenarios throughout the game in his unique fashion. And we went with this two-tone way of presenting them with the yellow and the pink, so that the whole package just screams at you. You know, it's just so bold and in your face, and I guess in that way matches the games.
Yeah, and there's some work which is a bit outside this category, but matching again the vinyl colors. Different vinyl colors you had with the Devolver exclusive one as well, being a really cool matchup with the sleeve colors.
We've got the top 3 favourite packaging and product design, which is the next category. What have we got? Kick us off.
On third place, we have the Horizon Forbidden West box set, which was released by Sony Classical. They put a ton of work into this box. It has this cool magnetic lid that you open up. When you open up the lid, you have the art print inserted there that you can take out and switch in for another art print that was also included.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and then they have 2 triple gatefold embossed sleeves with the records, and each record is their own color with special color effect in there. They just went all in on making this box set really cool, like a tangible product as well.
It looks amazing. And what came in second?
The Sonic Frontiers, the box set from Data Discs. Really sturdy slipcase box set with individual jackets with game art. Had a really nice booklet with artwork, and the composer Tomoyo Otani had comments to each section of the game that's represented on this vinyl release, where he talks about how he approached composing the music for it. And then he has this cool, also colored, this themed splatter color vinyl to match things up.
They do amazing work, don't they, at Data Discs? I mean, they don't put out much compared to the other labels, but they put such love and care into every release.
Yeah, everything they put out, when you get it in your hand, it really feels like a labor of love. And this one is no exception. And on first place, and this is starting to become a trend, I think, we have the Hi-Fi Rush box set from Laced Records.
And Tango Gameworks.
And Tango Gameworks, yeah. Have to remember to credit them for their involvement in this. I was a bit surprised, I was even considering if this release should go into this category as well, but it's so well thought through. Again, credit to Tango Gameworks for the whole composition and the colors and everything. It seems like a very solid package, but the overall theme is just so well thought through, even if there isn't a buttload of extras like there is on some of the others, big box sets. Everything just lines up very nicely with the colors and the artwork down to the records themselves. And I think this one being on top just goes to show that it's just as valid to have a what we call it, like content-wise more simple release, but very strong visual design and packaging.
Absolutely.
The ticket keeps ticking, don't sell me short. Your price is binding, my bond is yours for. Through echoes of laughter, I see only red. There will be no more write-downs of these blood debts.
We have top 3 favourite sound quality, and we've got some familiar names here.
Yeah, we have Sonic Frontiers once again, and Data Discs always put a ton of effort into the mastering, and they have their own in-house. The label is run by 2 brothers, and one does the business side of things, and the other is a mastering engineer who has his own studio. So they're very involved with that process themselves, and obviously this just goes to show for this one as well. Final Fantasy XIV on second place, the second volume box set by Square Enix Music. I touched about this a bit earlier as well, but they have world famous mastering engineer Bernie Grundman doing the mastering for this one and the first volume. And they have Japan have some of the best pressing plants in the world, in my opinion. When they do this on plain black vinyl release with talented mastering engineer, it's just such a great sounding. The black vinyl releases from Square Enix are some of the best sounding releases, modern releases in my collection, for sure. They're always a treat to listen to.
Who needs these fancy schmancy coloured discs?
I mean, I certainly don't mind them, and the first place just goes to show that it can still work, because once again we have Hotline Miami, mastered by the one and only Joe Caithness.
Yes, who has done, I think, all but 2 of our 100 and something releases now. Joe Caithness. And I've got an interview in the can with him as well for the podcast, which is very interesting because he is an expert in his field and can talk at length about any aspect of it. But yeah, he's been working with us for a long time. One of the first things he did with us was the Hotline Miami 1 album. And the interesting thing about that from a mastering perspective is that some of these tracks came in not exactly pristine WAV format or whatever, you know, from all sorts of different music makers, producers, some who lost their original session files, that kind of thing. So it was a really difficult project management task.
I appreciate his work, I gotta say that. But yeah, I guess that's no surprise considering it's licensed music for the most part. That comes from all sorts of sources.
Next category, we've got top 3 favourite labels with multiple releases in 2023.
So the category includes labels that had 3 or more releases in 2023. On third place, we have Laced Records.
Never heard of them.
You guys. You seem to be in every category almost this year.
Well, we released a ton of stuff over the last couple of years, so...
You really did. I think you're competing fiercely with IMA-Bit to be the most productive label each year.
Last year was crazy. We started off this year slower, so who knows how we'll end up. But who took number 2?
Black Screen Records did.
Awesome.
And they've been around for a long time, and I think, and I'm just guessing here, that part of their popularity also goes for a lot of us Europeans. Really appreciate that they seem to import almost all the American releases for their store based in Germany, which saves us from having to import them ourselves, which costs a ton of money. And on top of that, they put out their own releases that are also very, very cool. They seem to be expanding a lot. They have their own physical store right now in Cologne, and are really dipping their toes into anime, both distributing but also they're releasing stuff for anime or J-pop rock bands as well.
And who came top?
In first place, we have Very OK Vinyl, which is this... I want to say it's largely driven by one person. I know there's some other more people involved in the background, but it's really this lovely fellow, Scott Jeffrey, who runs his relatively new label out of Canada, who seems to also have found a similar distribution niche over there, because it's surprisingly expensive for Canadians to import records from the US as well, kind of in the same boat as us. So they are doing their own cool releases and have found a strong niche in visual novels and other Japan releases. They've really gotten some cool niche titles, but with a strong fan base, like Song of Sire or Steins Gate, which is coming out later this year. Plus, they seem to have built a really strong community on Discord and other socials around both the label and these kind of games and anime, which I assume is what brought them up top here.
Very cool. Next, we have the top 3 most anticipated announced releases for 2024.
Yeah, and this was a fun category to sort of browse through, because for all these categories I have added an other option, so people can add titles. That there were 10 pre-picked titles for each of these categories that I picked out, assuming that these would probably be some of the most popular. And this anticipated announced releases just had a ton of suggestions in the other category for titles that I didn't include in these top 10. Because we already know about well over 100 releases coming out in 2024, and we're in February, and there's a ton more that's yet to be announced, I'm sure. In third place, one that's been teased for a while but should be coming out this year, is soundtrack to Guilty Gear Strive from Channel 3 Records. And they've really built up a good relationship with Arc System Works, the developer for the Guilty Gear series. The series seemed to have really exploded in popularity over the years, and especially with Strive, so I'm not surprised that people are looking forward to this. And they also have some very distinctive soundtracks.
They do. And I see a lot of people asking about Guilty Gear over and over and over again on the Discord and other places, so there's been a sort of a steady drumbeat, I think, of people wanting that one.
Yeah, they even Channel 3 even managed to make a meme sort of out of the Guilty Gear series by after having teased the first game soundtrack, which also came out in 22, I think. In second place, also not really a surprise, I think, is the Persona 4 Golden soundtrack to be released by I'm8bit. It remains to be seen if they actually make 2024, but let's hope.
That's one of those games that people play for over 100 hours, and the same tunes come back over and over again and loop, and they just get stuck so firmly in your head. It's incredible, and so I can imagine, it's a clear example of people who have so much nostalgia for spending so much time in that world with those characters, and vinyl feels like the perfect way, really, to represent a Persona game.
Yeah, and I'm8bit already put out the Persona 4 soundtrack, so the golden tracks are sort of the cherry on top of that. The golden tracks seem to be very highly regarded amongst the fans of the series. I must admit I haven't played Persona 4 yet, but I'll get to it one day.
And I'm glad to see basically my favourite soundtrack from the last couple of years is also everyone else's most anticipated.
Yes, and first place we have the Tunic soundtrack, to be released by Stumpy Frog Records with assistance from Mango Mage Records. So they're sort of working together to make this thing happen and get out. And it was actually supposed to release late last year, but was delayed into this. And those who've been following the sort of development and creation and teasers for the vinyl release for this soundtrack are incredibly hyped up about it, because they are going to put a ton of work and love into this one.
What are you looking forward to in 2024?
Oh boy, should I open up my list of awaiting pre-orders?
Well, is there anything that comes top of mind that you're waiting for, or that you suspect will even, like, the pre-order will be announced?
Oh yeah, one thing I'm really excited about. There's many things I'm excited about, actually. Yes, one of the big ones for me is the Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky trilogy series, which is getting a very ambitious release in 3 4LP box sets for each game in that series.
Blimey.
The Trail series is very dear to me, and is sort of starting to compete with the Final Fantasy as my favorite JRPG series. So I'm really excited about that. And another thing I want to shout out is the arrangement / original work album Giants, which is a collab joint between Black Screen Records and Brave Wave in particular, who've been working on this album for 6 years. They've worked closely with Japanese composers for classic games such as Mega Man and Ninja Gaiden. They're original composers, and some newer Western composers like T. Lopes or Lena Rain, working together with classic Japanese composers, covering music from Mega Man, covering music from Ninja Gaiden, Panzer Dragoon, Gimmick, and Celeste, alongside composing brand new original tracks for this album. I'm really excited about this finally coming out after having been teased and in the works for so long. Finally, we have Data Discs, who thankfully are showing up in 2024 as well, with their Nights into Dreams announcement, working with this Sega once again.
Love the soundtrack to that. I used to put that Saturn disc into my CD player and just listen to it over and over again.
Yeah, I'm really excited about how that one's going to come out. And it's going to come out next month, actually.
Freddie, thank you so much for your time, both the time you spent on doing this poll and also coming on to talk to me. I really hope I get the opportunity to have you back before next year. You're very welcome to come back and share the poll results next year, but maybe there'll be an opportunity before that to talk about more the video game vinyl scene, because of course you're so knowledgeable about all of these releases, and you love the music as well, and your brain stretches across all of these different genres and, as we say, aesthetic genres, and the different types of releases from different countries, all these different labels, and of course you still find time to be a parent and get some gaming in. So thank you very much for your dedication and your work in the community to kind of help inform people.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. I've been really enjoying the podcast, so it's an absolute pleasure to be able to join in myself.
Okay, we're going to move on to Done in 60 Seconds now, where we recommend each other something. It doesn't have to be a piece of music, but normally it is. I probably went first last time we did this, Matt. I can't even remember, it was so long ago, so I'm going to put you in the hot seat. Do you want to set your timer up for 60 seconds?
In my downtime, as sad and pathetic as it may be, one of my favourite hobbies is to log into the video game music database website, VGMDB, and scroll for lesser-known video game soundtracks from back in the day that I have not heard before. One such soundtrack I recently discovered is called Xenogears Creed. Yes, it's from Xenogears, but it is an arrangement album, and it's just a really fantastic album of Celtic music. Xenogears composer Yasunori Mitsuda, no surprise that he's always had a love for Celtic music, but as well as working with Japanese composers on this, he also went out to Ireland and just basically gathered this team of random musicians and absolutely smashed it out the park with this. This track is called June Mermaid.
That is a wonderfully intimate version of an already very intimate piece. Now, I was checking out some of the core RPG from Japan soundtracks from the 90s, obviously your Chrono Triggers, your Final Fantasies, etc. Xenogears is one of those greats. Mitsuda recently did the 20th, well, it must have been recent, it could have been a couple of years ago now, the 20th anniversary concert, which I think got a Blu-ray or something in Japan and then ended up on YouTube, and is just a magnificent concert of music. And there's something there, like, this was presumably pretty old, this arrangement album, so it kind of puts Mitsuda in the place of composers, and maybe mainly in Japan, you think even back to Sugiyama with Dragon Quest, where the composer knew that the original soundtrack was so strong that it was worthy of recording arrangements with live instruments. Even back, then it's not something that sort of happened later. It's something that even the composers at the time knew and wanted to do, and produced the albums and got the musicians and played some of it themselves and so on and so forth. So for that reason, it kind of, Mitsuda's already a legend, but I think he was creating his legend all along, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
What have you got for me in return?
So mine's pretty straightforward. There was a soundtrack I meant to get to last year for a game called Lamplighters League. Sadly, the game didn't hit performance targets according to the news story that came out around, sadly, a lot of layoffs, or I think even the studio might get shut down. I should probably check that. But the composer, John Everest, threw everything at this game. He just did the most enormous orchestral arrangements, really, really in your face, like, I don't know, John Williams-y, Indiana Jones-y, but even more kind of bombastic than that. So it's just, it's a banger, really. It's an orchestral banger. The whole soundtrack's great. Everyone should go and check it out. I've been sort of keeping a touch on John Everest stuff over the years. I think he's going to continue to go places. I really hope he gets, a game that's going to fly better than Lamplighters League did.
Did I hear a banjo and a harmonica in that?
It might have got a bit Morricone at the end there, yeah.
Yeah, it does. It gets a bit wild. I like that. That's cool. Bit different to the stuff that I would usually listen to. But
Yeah,
what's
it's like
the game about?
a tactics game, a sort of over the top tactics game, turn based for the actual combat part of it.
The music matches then. Right, that is all we have time for. I am very impressed that we made it through all of that news with some time to spare. Thank you very much to our guest, Frederik. We loved having you on. Everybody go check out BlipBlop if you want to stay updated on literally everything that is happening with video game vinyl. Please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Even better, leave us a review on your podcast service of choice, especially Apple Podcasts, because that really does help. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at GXM Podcast. I am Mat Ombler, that is Matt with one T, Ombler, on Twitter, and Tom is T Quillfeldt, that is TQUILLFELDT. If you have any feedback, hit us up at gxmpodcast@gmail.com. We always love to hear from you. The show is produced by both of us. It is edited by Tom, who puts in a lot of time to making us all sound very good. Music is by Zach Foster, and the show art is by Joshua Klein. Thanks and goodbye.
Bye.